Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about the difference between winemaking and homebrewing. So let's first talk about the ingredients because we know that wine and beer taste completely different. You'll be able to recognize it by taking a sip, by smelling the drink, and one of the reasons why are the ingredients. Let's talk about beer first. Beer is typically made out of water, and in order to get that amber, brownish, darker color of beer, you get this by dipping in grains or malt extract. This could be either powder or liquid extract inside the water, and this forms the color of your finished product. However, in terms of wine, what you can do, you can add water as well. However, you can also make it from juice. I haven't heard of people making beer from juice, so drop a comment below if that's something that you do. If you use water in wine, what you could do to affect the color is add sugar. So the sugar that you add can either be white, yellow, brown sugar, and molasses, and this can affect the color of your wine. The next aspect of the ingredients that influences beer versus winemaking is the sugar. So in beer, you do not need sugar, so the yeast can eat the sugar from the grains, or if you want to start with malt extract and not necessarily get the physical grains, you can. And malt extract is a form of sugar. Malt extract, what it is, it's a mix of malt, which is a grain, and water. It's sweet and it can have either a powder or liquid form. So I've tried to make beer with a powder malt extract and it overflew all over the stove. So let's see if using liquid malt extract is the same. And I have a batch here of a liquid extract that I can use to make beer. And since it's so sweet, how do you get that bitter taste in beer? You get it by adding hops. What hops are, they come from a plant, and I have a packet of hops right here. A few pellets of hops. However, in wine, there is a bitterness as well, but it's a different type of bitterness than beer. And in wine, you do not add hops, you can add tannins. And how do you get tannins? You get this by crushing the grapes, and you'll get the tannins with the seeds, the stems, and the skins of the grapes. And these skins and stems affect the color as well. So once you have skins, stems, and seeds in your winemaking process, this leads to red wine. However, if you remove the skins and remove all the extras and just simply add the grapes, you're more likely making white wine. However, if you don't want to go to the grocery store to buy a bunch of grapes, or if you don't want to get your feet or hands dirty by crushing them, you can also add tannins with tannin powder. And this tannin powder has to be added before fermentation. And once the fermentation is done, you will have that bitterness from your wine that replicates store-bought wine. Another aspect of the ingredients that affects wine versus beer making is the yeast. So we have yeast for beer versus yeast for wine. And the first yeast that I was using was EC1118, which is in a powder form. However, I recently bought winemaking yeast and it's liquid. I used to use 1 teaspoon of EC1118 for my homebrew, and drop a comment below if I should use the same 1 teaspoon or the same measurement of liquid yeast compared to powder yeast. I would assume that is the case. And once pitching in yeast, you shouldn't worry because whether it's liquid or powder, yeast replicates and it eats its dead yeast cells. Therefore, you most probably will have enough by adding 1 teaspoon if you're making 1 gallon or 5 liters. If you're making 5 gallons, I would suggest to add 1 tablespoon of liquid yeast or a full pack of powdered yeast. In terms of beer, beer has its own yeast. It's called Kvike yeast. But I'm wondering if I can have all the beer ingredients. So if I can add malt extract, hops, everything, all the ingredients for beer, and add wine yeast, will it taste like wine or will it taste like beer? It's one of the experiments I'll try in the near future. And if you'd like to book a class, the link is in the description below. We make multiple experiments with different types of ingredients to make wine, beer, or cider. So the ingredients were the first main difference between beer and winemaking. And the second main difference goes to fermentation. So we have before fermentation, during fermentation, and after fermentation, where beer and wine making differentiates. So before fermentation, when it comes to wine, we have to mix all the ingredients together in a warm pot, and you do not have to boil your ingredients because we just have to dissolve the sugar. However, in terms of beer making, you do have to boil. You have to boil your malt extract or your grains. You have to boil your hops, and this takes longer because it takes longer to boil your ingredients. And when you add hops, it's gradually, so you don't add them all at once. You add some hops, boil it a bit, then a few minutes later, 15 to 30, you add other sets of hops. So the beer making process is more lengthy before fermentation, and most yeasts have the same optimal temperature, so they're roughly around 26 to 35 degrees Celsius. And when it comes to winemaking, your wash is roughly at that temperature. You can cool it off a bit. However, when it comes to beer making, since you just boiled your wort, you'll have to cool it down, and this will take longer to cool down than your wine since you boiled the beer and you did not boil the wine. And in order to accelerate the beer cooling off, you can dump your pan in a bucket of ice, or you can let it cool naturally. Both do not affect the flavor. So that's before fermentation. And then during fermentation, beer typically takes less time to ferment than wine because beer is about 4 to 5 to 6% alcohol per volume. However, wine, you're willing to reach from 10 to 12 or 15% alcohol. And this means that for beer, it's faster because there's less sugar involved. There's less sugar in grains compared to fruits. If you want to ferment fruits, for example, grapes, there are more sugar in grape than there is in grains. Therefore, wine fermentation takes longer than beer fermentation. So for beer, it was roughly 10 days. For wine, it takes roughly 3 to 4 weeks. And there's also the aging process. So now we're at the step of after fermentation. And they say that wine gets better with time. And why is this the case? Because once your wine ages, your flavors will blend together. It's gonna have a richer taste. And I'd like to know, what's a richer taste for you? How would you define a richer taste? Does this mean more earthy flavors? Contrarily, when it comes to beer, it doesn't necessarily get better with time. By letting beer age, your flavor composition will change, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna be better. So it's really gonna depend on the beer that you have. And let me know in the comments below, if you make beer, do you age your beer? Seems like it would just be wine for me. However, depends on the beer you're making. And if you found this video valuable, share it with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.